Smart's pretty good. Welcome to this edition of Smart History with a guest appearance, 2 guest appearances, not 1 but 2, by Dr. Nicholas Santamaria and
Dr. Jesse Hoffman.
We're going to argue about art. Today we have here a Malevich from 1915. It's a suprematist composition called Circle and Rectangle.
It's a truly beautiful and breathtaking piece, if I had to say so myself.
Perhaps it could be called Rectangle and Circle.
Perhaps, but it's not, so let's not argue about that.
Oh, well, I'm not really sure what it's called. It could be either one or the other, but however...
Well, it's rectangle and circle, so let's leave it at that.
We have a blue rectangle and a darker blue circle. And
a blue that is almost apparent to be the color black.
Well, that's probably...
Fun fact, black is not really a color.
Fun indeed. Anyways, there's a circle and a rectangle, and they're next to each other, which is supposed to be a big deal, because back in 1915, the preceding art movement from which Malevich was trying to deviate was at the time Cubism.
Cubism.
Which was constituted by Picasso and his contemporaries. Malevich tried to move in a more purely Russian direction by making everything a little bit more boring and square, and reducing the amount of shapes and complexity of the pieces to what is truly necessary.
Moving forward.
Alright, now, this piece was made right around the outbreak of World War I, which was the first international global crisis to affect millions of people worldwide. Now, thousands have died, thousands were disillusioned by the promises of communist governments and, you know, this big war machine, the militarism that was occurring had just disillusioned artists and the public alike.
I'm sorry, what were we talking about again? That happened?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Well, that might explain this. Because in about 1927, he traveled back to Warsaw and Berlin,
year he participated
and
in an
he went back,
by
and he finally started getting recognized as a real good artist. But the thing was, he went to go leave all the paintings at the Soviet Union, but after, everything really shifted after Lenin and Trotsky's fall from power. So the modern art, everything started moving towards modernist art, and the thing was about it is Stalin's regime. It turned against abstraction, considering
and perhaps heavily informed his work.
A lot of his art got confiscated. The thing that is very interesting about the whole suprematism movement in general is that it came about when Russia was in a revolutionary state, and the thing about it was, when Stalin took hold in 1924, it became limiting freedom on artists, and the thing about it was, by the time 1934 came around, the doctrine of socialist realism became an official policy, and that actually stopped people from making this kind of art, because they were looking at it, and I mean, at the time, we were kind of entering World War II, so people were looking at it, and they were going, who are these weak men who are just painting shapes instead of powerful people who convey power, instead of these weak, feeble,
exactly.
It
didn't align with the communist beliefs of...
It just doesn't fit in with the whole idea of power.
Yeah.
This doesn't show any kind of power. It shows nothing. It shows squares. That's
What's
what they
interesting
said.
about...
I'm pretty sure there's an exact quote from Joseph Stalin saying, "Hey, what's up with these squares?"
Malevich's compositions were often inspired by aerial views of landscapes. He was an amateur aviator, and was very
Which would
into
explain
photography.
his airplane piece, wouldn't it?
Anyways.
He would be an amateur if he can't even draw an airplane, it's just shapes.
Well, the artist is intentionally calling attention to his purposeful juxtaposition of 2 seemingly simplistic shapes, which at first looks rather odd, because it could be almost a letter I if the dot was moved slightly over to the right.
You know, it could also be the letter T if the dot would turn into a rectangle and was placed directly on top.
Certainly. Yes.
It could be
that could be a possibility. Yes, but it's a circle and a rectangle. The intention here was aimed solely at the purity, the visual language that is provided by these simplistic shapes that are easily recognizable. Anybody looking at this would not see anything deeper than a circle and a rectangle. This was, however, intentional.
This piece makes me want to puke.
Preceding the time of the 1917 Communist Revolution in Russia, artists like Malevich began a powerful independent art movement called suprematism.
Yes, and actually, he wrote a book in 1927 called The Non-Objective World, and Malevich described his inspiration about what really got him to make these images, and his exact quote was, "I felt only night within me, and it was then that I conceived this new art which I called suprematism."
He said he wanted to capture the supremacy of pure feeling. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That is correct. I said something that was correct.
And he also, I mean, in his book, if you really read it, his grammar is actually very
suprematist. Not to be confused with supremacist. Malevich was not a white supremacist.
Let's reiterate that one more time, that he is not a white supremacist.
Not.
Okay. He actually drew a bunch of black squares and black circles, so
yes,
totally not.
He was friends with a lot of these black shapes. A characteristic factor of the suprematist movement is that all of the paintings float in a white, mysterious, ambiguous background. There's a limited use of color, as well as the fact that the geometric shapes are placed in odd juxtapositions to one another.
That was wonderful, wasn't it? Alright, now back to the piece. Now the piece, I feel like had a lot to do with that song.
It does.
Because
it just says so much.
It has to deal with the idea of space.
So little. And so much dynamics. There's a clear distinction between back there and over here. With the world of emotion and the void beyond emotion that is represented by this white space and these two figures.
Two figures being the shapes.
They could almost be representative of a human.
They could.
Or two humans. One being a square and one being a circle.
And Malevich could have easily been the circle breaking away from the squares. As you know, people did start calling each other squares if you didn't, like to hang out and accept new ideas.
Precisely. Communists were especially square fellows.
Yes, they were. They were very square.
And they did like to ostracize their circles. Malevich was one big circle.
But he broke out of the circle.
Yes, he made many circles.
He made many circles and broke out of them all.
This one circle went on to paint circles like nobody else before.
This circle set the example for future circle painters everywhere.
Yes, he broke the book on circle painting.
And another thing, while you're looking at suprematist art, you might be looking at it saying, "Hey, where are all the triangles? Why aren't there any triangles here?" Well, guess what? That's part of formalism. That's pagan malarkey.
The idea behind suprematism was to strip away all the unnecessary factors down to the bare minimum, the simplest possible explanation, like an ingenious solution to a short equation, like Einstein's theory of relativity, the formula E = mc². Malevich's suprematist painting of a black quadrilateral within a white border had much the same impact on Russian artists in 1915 that Einstein's theory had on scientists. It unveiled a world never seen before, one that was unmistakably modern. Later, Malevich began to tilt his quadrilaterals, quite a big difference there, and to simplify his paintings still further in the search of the ultimate work of art.
So he tilted trying to get some more
to make
expression
it
out of it,
to
but
make it more
really, it
perfect.
It really didn't do anything though.
It sure did, though. You see, suprematism had an elegant simplicity that belied the intense efforts required to synthesize a complex set of ideas and reduce them to a fundamental law. The relation between art and science is closer than we might think, for despite the difference in approach, they are united by the imagination.
And keep in mind, at the time, they are making all this art in communist Russia. So
yes, it's the first purely Russian art movement. This is happening within the confines of that country.
So all these things are being justified by an ideological connection to the communist government,
yes,
and in between equality for all people,
and could be in fact in opposition of it.
That's kind of what I just stated. He didn't just paint shapes on dumb colors. He actually
not dumb colors. He only painted on white backgrounds.
No, that isn't true. You can see by his paintings, Barrow and Room and Taking in the Ride, that he actually did a lot of different paintings where he tried to take this supremacist style at Malevich.
The first purely Russian art of the 20th century was suprematism. It was devised by Kazimir Malevich, who are we looking at today? Yes, who we are looking at today. Bad grammar, whatever.
And like I said, while looking at it, also keep in mind that before his movement, that him and other artists also worked on architecture, which had a big deal to do with, the expanding of the ideas. And he actually made a supremacist teapot for his first design. And
a what, you say?
A teapot.
A teapot.
Yeah, imagine pouring tea out of a big square. But looking at it, you can tell that everything he was trying to do was good and pure, and that this work was just being made for the love of life and the love of nature. And he really tried to make the advance so that people could develop art for art's sake. And he actually has a quote that goes, "Art does not need us." And it never did.
Yes. So in that case, Malevich could be considered one of the leading figures in a movement towards a more modern art for art's sake.